suffering from allergies today, so I'm going to be doing very little talking, and I've asked Susan to read the curatorial statement in my stead. But what I do want to do is to thank all of you for being here in support of the artists and in support of the gallery. And the tea really is my way of honoring all of the hard work that the artists put into creating these beautiful works of art that we have the pleasure of experiencing day to day. I'm going to be really sad when this show comes down. I can't tell you how much I've enjoyed living with the work. And I say that because we own this building, and so we occupy all floors here, and so I get a chance to interact with the work every day. It's just the beauty and the energy that's been created around this work, and we've had a lot of people come through and really spend time here, which is something that I really appreciate. You know, on many occasions, people will come and walk through very quickly and, you know, not really take time to study the work and give time over to understanding the process and really admiring the fact that they realize that you women have really put a lot of work into creating these wonderful pieces. So I wanted to share that with you. I get to experience that when you're not here, and I am a great observer of human interaction when it comes to art, and I've really had the opportunity to observe that in many ways. And again, just in supporting what Alice said about our videos, I've had teachers call me to tell me that they use them in their classroom instruction. Just recently, a professor in Atlanta called to ask a question about something as it related to one of the topics that was being discussed. So they are used because I think the artist process is really interesting to art students and to professors who are trying to convey the importance of, you know, the art. So, you know, it's not this passive thing that happens, it really becomes part of an extended educational experience for many. So I thank you for allowing us to videotape this, although I don't know if I told you that, but we're doing it. And to thank you all again for honoring us with just the privilege of working with you. It's been really a fantastic experience. So I'm now going to turn the floor over to Susan, who's going to read from the curatorial statement.
So I just wanted to say thank you to Myrtis and Alex for this beautiful, lovely tea, and all of us feel extremely pampered, and thank you for coming to hear us today. The world is going to hell, and I am printing yellow. The world is going to hell, and I am printing yellow is the affirmation of 10 women artists who hold firm to their conviction to create objects of beauty in the face of a changing world and the challenges of daily life. They seek refuge in the joy of art making and offer the color yellow as a metaphor for exploring notions of self-preservation and empowerment as they make their imprint in ceramics, paintings, photography, and prints. The term women's work is elevated and redefined through their art, which is evocative, complex, and thought-provoking. As artists, they produce objects and imagery which are as divergent as their personalities, and yet there exists a beautiful synergy revealed in the harmony and continuity of their combined works. As women, they are bound by wisdom and self-assuredness gained through maturity and life experiences. Their renderings are uninhibited and speak to their truths, which serve to deepen our understanding of how they view themselves and the world around them. Through their lens and unique perspectives, we are challenged with questions of identity, to embrace our imperfections, examine the dynamics of our romantic relationships, and contemplate our connection to the universe. Myrtis Vidolo, founding director and independent curator, Galerie Myrtis. So thank you, Myrtis, for capturing what we're all trying to express here in this exhibition. My name is Susan Goldman. I'm one of the artists in the exhibition. And I have been involved in printmaking for over 35 years. as my age goes up, the number goes up. The kind of concept for the show developed out of connections with other women artists that I have been friends with for a very long time. And my work deals primarily with color. And these images that you see up here, and my print is over there, is called Flower Power. And I have 4 pieces in the back, which are these large sort of totem. My work over the years has always dealt with color. I think I've discovered through this very recent work, color is so important to me. And I think some of the choices of objects I've used in my prints over time kind of derived from traditional still life images of vases, amphoras, flowers most recently, deal with capturing a single object sort of central to the page and becoming sort of a vehicle to hold the layering of color, which is something that I love, especially through the medium of printmaking. So I had come out of a long year of very hard work and project in 2012, 13. And I was really tired of everything I had sort of done before. And I ended up cutting out these circles and just started throwing them. And as I say throw, I would ink up a circle and lay it over this white paper. And I was just these pops of color, these dots. And out of it emerged the use of the target. And the way that I print is I can actually ink up separate circles and build my target by pieces like a puzzle. And I was rolling, if you'll see, large flats of just pure color down the bottom of the page. And what emerged was just a very clear, resilient bang, like, that is awesome. It made me feel good. They were life-size, they were the size of the human body. And so I thought, is it okay to leave them like this? Because typically I sort of ornament my prints and keep adding a recognizable image, although abstracted. And it just felt really good. And I think sometimes when you're creating work, even if you're not an artist, but if you let yourself just go with, that feels really good, I'm just gonna go with that. And that took a lot of courage, but I think it wasn't as courageous as I thought, because being in my mid-50s and going through a lot of different life changes, I was like, I can do whatever I want now. A lot of younger artists probably feel that, but, and so I think these deal with, I see these as a grouping, the 4 that are in the back of the gallery, as sort of a, when you look at them, you know what you're looking at. It's a circle. You make associations with the target, the center, the eye, the vibration of color. I said it was Gustav Klimt meets Kenneth Noland over here. I have some that have a lot more bronze and gold layering in some of the newer work as well. But I feel that the idea of being on target and just focusing on my intuition, and the idea of the world is going to hell and I'm printing yellow, which we'll talk about a little bit later, was, I usually say that when I begin a project in printing, because typically I begin with yellow and I layer a red on top and a blue, because I'll get all the colors of the rainbow out of the layering of the color. So I think that for me, that statement means, you have the radio on when you're working and you hear all the horrors that are happening all over the world. There's a very rough time in our lives right now as the country is at odds and all these crazy things. And sometimes as an artist in your studio, I feel like, wow, it's pretty bad out there, but look, I get to roll this big yellow and it feels really nice. And when I work with other artists who are involved in the show as well, it's kind of this, you wonder, is it okay to do that? Should I be out there doing something different because my work maybe isn't politically motivated, or bringing that awareness. But I think that the tenets that have driven me as an artist are a desire for beauty, to be surrounded by beauty. It makes me feel good. I can compose myself, and I can go out and meet the challenges of life. So I hope that when you see these, I want you to feel this work in your belly, like, I want you to feel good, and for a moment you're just surrounded by this impact of color and beauty, and they're not perfect, they're not typically symmetrical. It's like music, it moves, you move with it. So basically, that's all I have to say at this point. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. I'm Barbara Kerne. Myrtis told us to introduce ourselves, that she might have actually been able to speak more. So I've been making art all of my life. I can remember as a child thinking that that was one thing that was most important to do, was to make pictures. I was a tenured faculty member teaching printmaking at Montgomery College, I think for 20-something of the 30 years that I was there. I'm now emerita, so I get to work in my own studio. And the work that I'm doing in printmaking now, I make paintings also, and I work back and forth with them. And one kind of material or approach informs the other. And I find that it's a way for me to move forward with my work and to do what I'm doing. The work in this show are all woodcuts. I think I've been making woodcuts since about 1995, where I met Susan. I guess I met you earlier than that, but Susan helped me print a very large print that was too big for me to reach. We talked about that. And that's how we got to know each other, because I just couldn't get over to the other side of it. My work has always been about the landscape from the very beginning. Even in graduate school, in its most abstract nature, it was abstracted forms of the landscape. And I'm still very involved with nature. I've lived for these last, I guess, 40 years now. First in a house in the woods, and now in a house that's very high up on a cliff where I can see the river in the winter or be surrounded by trees. So there are almost always some kind of tree form in my life and in my work. These pieces, these woodcuts, have to do with tarot. About a year and a half ago, my children gave me the Jung Red Book. It's about his symbolism, his ideas, and it has it's a wonderful book because it's huge and it's gorgeous color. And it has photographs in it of the work that was done while he was alive and interested in this. And it has to do with the idea of abstract forms symbolizing, having universal symbols. And he liked the tarot cards because of that. And there's a whole history of tarot, which I won't even talk about. But I like the tarot cards too. And it turns out that my father told me that his mother, when he was a very little boy, and now we're talking about 1910 probably, because my father has not been alive for a long time. He was 96 when he died, so he used to have tarot cards. And when I saw them, I liked them, and he saw them in my house. And he was reminded of that. And he told me that he used to sit under the table and ask her about them. So they've always been very dear to me in that way. So now, when I started to think about the Red Book and start to do this work, the print on the left, To Life, starts with imagery that is in that card, but it's changed quite a lot. And then as I continued, and I'm doing now at home more work, but the other three pieces in here have to do with thinking about the tarot card, but really using my own symbol and imagery. And as you can see, there are still trees in all of them. And when I do the work, and I work in my own studio. I do my own printing. I started to talk about this on the way here. When I first started to teach printmaking, and we go back years, I didn't have a press, and I thought, oh, I'll use the press at school because we had a wonderful facility with lots of presses. And of course, I discovered very quickly, as every faculty member knows, you really can't do your own work when the students are there asking you. So I've had a press for a very long time. So I know how to do that, and I do that. But these pieces were after I did my own proofing, and if you look here, what you see is, to begin with, in this one, it's actually the drawing is the print that's in the back room. I start with the imagery and the symbols and the whatever that I want to use, and I transfer the drawing to a piece of wood. And I almost brought a piece of wood because people who don't know about printmaking don't know what that looks like. And I'm sorry I didn't now because they're wonderful. But I only transfer the bare outline of it. And as I begin to do the work, I carve and I try to use my intuition. And so all of the movement that you see and the dark and the light happens as I am doing the work. And it's because I've developed the painting the same way. And I'm trying to think the same way in that, even though one of them is a print and the other is painting. So here you can see in my studio, if you can see the drawing, that the wood block is there here, and my carving tools are there. And then what I did was proof the work on my press, and you see here, I guess it's the print near the window, I've done the first proofs for it. It's called Moonlight. And once those were done, I went to Susan's wonderful studio, Lily Press, and she printed the editions for me. So by the time I came, I was ready to do that, and I helped her, but she really was a master printer and was able to do that, so I really thank her for that. So, because I'm a little further along than my 55 years that Susan talked about, so I was happy to have the help to do that. I've made art all my life, as I said. The need to do it still remains. I look around me because many people I know have retired from whatever their professions were, and there's no way that I could even think about that because I have to do this. And people say, oh, you know, you're lucky, and I am lucky. I feel very fortunate to be able to do this. On the other hand, it's still hard. You still have to do it because you have to do it. So, it's a good thing. It's not a complaint, but it's an interesting thing for me to think about at this point in my life. When I went to college to begin with, I went to Brooklyn College at the time that the abstract expressionists were just beginning to be known. They really weren't famous yet. But I studied with Jimmy Ernst and with Ed Reinhardt, and then and Robert Motherwell was there. And in fact, the best story I have about Ed Reinhardt is a wonderful one, because I had him for a design class. And this must have been like 1957 or 56. And he told us all to bring magazine cutouts, papers, you know, just a lot of images. Now we have our little kids doing that in school, but at that time nobody had ever done that. And he had us come, and then he would say, and he would walk around, and they were on tables like this. Just paste them. Doesn't matter how you do it. Tear them up and paste them down. And you know, here I am. I'm probably 15 years old, and you know, what is he doing? And I have a former sister-in-law who was in the class with me, so we've laughed about this for all the years. And then he said, he brought black in the ink, and he said, okay, now paint over it. There you are. Now, we didn't know who he was. We didn't know anything about his work for years, literally years. But it was an interesting experience to remember to have. When I went to graduate school, I studied with Sidney Gross, who was a New York painter who used to come down, because by this time I'd moved here, to the University of Maryland. And he was an abstract expressionist also, trying to combine, at that time, it was the late 60s, hard edge and abstract expressionism. So I have that in my background. But also, as a kid, my best friend in junior high school was an artist, and she still is, by the way. She lives in California, and she still makes art seriously and professionally. She used to do these very Matisse-like, careful line drawings. And I used to do this quick, gestural. And so to me, that gestural drawing has always been in my life. It's been a natural handwriting for me. And it's what I try to continue to do in my work. And when I'm successful, you can see it. And when I'm not so good. So, it's still the worst. So, at any rate, thank you.
Hi, I'm Miriam Mörsel Nathan, and thank you, Myrtis. Thank you so much. Thank you, Susan. And I'm feeling very honored to be part of this extraordinary group of artists and women. I didn't know most of you, and some I did know, and it's been a really extremely enriching experience. I have this painting, well, you can actually see it, but this painting, and I have some small prints, some small etchings, and so I'm going to start to talk a bit about the painting, but I think what I really have to say is that my journey through the world has always been through a creative lens, and I started through poetry, and I have a relationship with the word, and I wrote poetry for almost all my life until I made a big left turn and started to go visual. And actually people used to say your poems are very visual, which is, I think, because I was trying to actually get to this place. And I was thinking about the title of this show, The World's Going to Hell and I'm Printing Yellow, and my feeling is that where I come from was that a world that I came from went to hell. And my work is about trying to figure out what happened, what to do about it in terms of understanding what happened, and kind of putting pieces together. And so when I have written my 8,000 artist statements, because I do understand my work a lot through writing, I talk about traces and fragments and non-linear and difficulty with memory, because I heard stories. My parents came from Europe, and they were in Europe during World War II. Parts of the time they weren't in Europe, and parts they were. But that's I'm only giving you that context to know that I heard stories. I got information in bits and pieces. It was always a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and it was never in a linear way. And then there were photographs that we had, a box of old photographs, and I was always mesmerized by these photographs. So I wrote, and the writing was very spare. And what attracts me to poetry is that it's a distillation. And in my artist statement, I say, that like one word opens a universe. I mean, I remember a professor of mine saying that, when Arthur Miller wrote Death of a Salesman, it mattered that there was no article. It didn't say a death. It says death of a salesman. It doesn't say death of the salesman. It matters, every little article. And I think, that those little bits and pieces are a very big part, traces, fragments, and so on. So in this particular kind of work, and so I do paint, and I do large-scale works, and I also paint small, like 3x4 pieces, and I tend to move back and forth. I think there's always a dichotomy in my work. So if I've done a lot of large works, then I need to do small. I know it's coming. And if I've done a lot of small, I know I'm going to do large. I always work abstractly. The figure, if it comes in, it's usually somehow from a photograph, and then I do something to it to make it difficult to see. And I think that's also because it's difficult for me to see where I came from, what happened, and how do I understand this world, and how do I put it all together and map it out. So this kind of painting, which is more gestural, has those bits and pieces, and I've layered it, and I've tucked things under it, and I've put things on top of it, and it's just this layering and layering and layering until it's really kind of sort of an organized, in my mind's eye, accumulation of bits and pieces. And color, Susan actually introduced me to color, because and this is not as colorful as some of my recent works, but I did a lot that that are more like the 4 etchings that are here. So these etchings are another foray into trying to understand my world. And they are the third tier of work that I've done from photographs. I did a whole series and completed it in 2010, which was based on family photographs pre-World War II from former Czechoslovakia. And there were an aunt who didn't survive the war and an uncle who didn't survive the war. And taking the photographs, worked with Susan on them, and enlarged them, made transfers, did a whole wedding series, did a whole series about my Aunt Greta, in order to annotate them, in order to document them. There's something about documenting these little traces. So that happened, and then I did a series of prints. I'm also working with Susan, and they have embedded in them their photographs, their images from these photographs, but again, I blur them, I make them hard to see, which is the way memory is, and those are from the Dominican Republic, which is where my father was during the war years. I was not present at the first group of when the first group of photographs were taken, pre-World War II. I was born in the Dominican Republic, so I was present, but I don't remember it. And then this is from the latest series I did, which are all based on photographs that my father took of me in Richmond, Virginia, where I grew up. And I do remember those images and those places. But what I did was I had myself photoshopped out, because it's not about me. It's about time and place, and about fragments and details. It's not about me, but it is about me. It's about me trying to understand the world. And these are the most abstract versions, because I also have photographs of the interior of our living room, the back stairs, the front of my father's and my mother's grocery store, but I did things to them. So I was photoshopped out. Yes, thank you. I was photoshopped out. Susan screen printed the photoshopped out Miriam images onto a small plates. They're 5 by 5, and then I printed them in my studio. Some I did, actually I started them before, and then we did a whole series. And in some cases you can see, but not really, the interiors, and in some ways you can't. But this was the sort of the trilogy. Anyway, we can ask questions later, but this is kind of the base. So thank you all for being here.
Hi, I'm Patricia Underwood, and I just first want to thank Myrtis and Alex for this incredible hosting. I've never been treated like this in a gallery, and it feels incredibly wonderful. I want to thank Susan, who formulated the idea for this show and invited us, and it's really an honor to work with these women and to be part of this show. I've known some of you a long time, Barbara, Susan, but it's been really wonderful to meet the rest of them. Just to tell you a little bit about myself, like some of the others have mentioned, I don't remember not thinking of myself as an artist, or at least maybe I didn't call myself that, but I was trying to color the couch pink when I was 3 because I didn't like the color. But I think listening to what the others have said, I can reiterate some of the things. I think being an artist, a serious artist, not to put down anybody who's not to judge how serious you are, but I think you all know when you're this serious. It's just something intuitive. It's like if you're not creating, you don't feel right. You don't feel good. You feel, you don't feel well. Whatever medium you're, using. To give you a little bit of my background, I too, as a child, was encouraged, especially my father. My mother still does things operatically, not professionally, so there's creativity there. But my father was just curious about everything, different cultures, rocks. When we went on vacation, my souvenir was a rock collection from, rather than. And so I've always had this innate curiosity about things and cultures. you would probably not know, looking at my work, that I was trained very figuratively and literally from observation. And I love to draw. I tried to get a master's in drawing in 1979, and they looked at me like, you know, how, you can't do that. Now you can get a master's in just about anything. But I love to draw, I love to mark, I love to express. I've also always loved music, and so you don't see the figurative work here. I took a huge left turn in graduate school because I had studied Japanese, the Japanese language, in undergrad, and I was so taken by the kanji and how this beautiful set of marks was actually this enormous system of communication. And so I literally took a left turn. I guess I was already being influenced by African art and Aboriginal art. So symbols and symbol making was just, you feel like awoken, you know, it was like, wow, I used to do this 1,000 years ago. There was something very familiar about it. So all my work in grad school on turned into this. I used to go to musical productions and listen to classical and African and all kinds of music and make notebooks full of my own marks that were what I was hearing, or what I was hearing. You can't look at it and hum a few bars, but it's grown into this language visual language that I just keep using in all of my work. And so that kind of gives you a background. What you see here in the show started with the original idea for this exhibition, which was to be called At the Table. So I took off with that, and I was starting to work on that, and then we kind of, it evolved to printing yellow. Well, I kept on a track with these. So all the pieces in the show have to do with the concept of coming to the table, and actually today is a great example there are 5 pieces in this. The first piece is entitled Seating the Guests, and that's around the corner on the far wall that you see down the hall. The second is Serving the Food, which is over here in the back behind, next to Judith's 2 ceramic pieces. Seating the Guests, Serving the Food, Saying Grace is right here. This piece, actually this is Seating the Guests, so you've got that up there. And then the piece just over there is entitled Partaking. So it's kind of the 5 parts of the meal, partaking, and then there's dessert, which didn't come to Baltimore right now. But all of my work actually has to do, I tend to work in series. I tend to get an idea and I make a series out of it. Sometimes it takes a year, 2, 3. Some of the series that I worked on in 2003, I was very upset to read a New York Times article about. And remember, 2003, we had not entered Iraq yet. And Colin Powell was going to the UN, and it had to do with, we dropped a 500-pound bomb to find al-Qaeda suspects and killed 9 children. And I made a piece of 9 pieces that had to do with the souls of the children on the front and the bodies on the back, and symbolic. And so a lot of my work has to do with it. There's another body of work that has to do with images of women, and what would we be thought of in 500 years when they find images of us? So I went back and I found, and Maria Gombutas was a Lithuanian archaeologist, and I just studied her for 2 years, and she was incredible, because at the time that Richard Leakey was doing his research, it was predominantly a male-dominated field, and she studied Harvard. She was basically, to really shrink this down, she was taking all the fertility symbols that they were kind of metaphorically throwing in a pile and saying, whoa, wait a minute, and she spent her life studying it. So I have a whole body of work that juxtaposes ancient and modern images of women. So you've got Jane Fonda and Barbarella like this, and there's actually a carving that looks just like it in the same print. So point being that like now, this is a series that I still have other pieces going on beyond these pieces, but I love the idea that, I take a concept and then I just start to go with it and somehow weave my pieces into it. These pieces in particular, to get to the materials, I'm trained as a printmaker, but I've always been very irreverent with prints because I like to put a lot of things on top of them. Nothing here has them, but I've drawn with bathroom caulking for years, which is like a 3-dimensional line. So that shows up in a lot of my work and it gets painted. This series, they're all printed on pieces of veneer, wood veneer. and there are pieces of fabric embedded into it. So each piece that you look at, this piece in particular, this was like to imagine a border print on a tablecloth. And they're all tablescapes. They're all basically looking up from up above. And so seating the guests, you can see that, you know, my shapes are kind of getting ready to get seated at the table. Many of you can probably see the partaking over there looks like a cacophony of shapes and very chaotic, which is kind of what happens when everybody starts to eat and talk and pass food. And so that's what's going on there. But again, those are all, so that in that one, this is a huge piece of fabric. I used to have a quilt business 100 years ago when the kids were really little, and I stopped printing to get the chemicals out of the house, so I have all these fabrics. Anyway, that's just been kind of embedded into the center of the piece. The one piece over there has a runner, the piece in between the two pieces over there has placemats. So it's all, you know, the concept is a table. And anyway, I hope you enjoy them. I've basically taken the pieces of veneer, put the fabric on. They're all then lino cuts and some hand painting. And I love materials, and you know, I hope you look at all of our websites, see more of the work as well. And you know, I'll look forward to questions later. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Stockton, and I too must thank Myrtis and Alex and Susan. I'm pretty new to the DC area, and I came down, I've been printing large-scale woodcuts pretty much for 15 years, and I was putting out feelers. Where can I print in the DC area? And thank goodness I got connected to Susan, because our relationship's still pretty new, but it's been fabulous. And in fact, these 4 agrarian prints were printed with Susan. To give you a little short background, I was trained as an architect. I worked in the field for a number of years, and then when my children came along, I went back to my first love of doing artwork in those maybe 20 minutes in between changing diapers and doing the mommy track. So lucky for me, I eventually ended up in Fairfield County, Connecticut, which was a fabulous gold mine for numerous arts organizations. And I was able to really dive, once my kids went off to school, I was able to really dive in, and I was doing stone carving and metal welding. And lucky for me, I took a wood cut workshop, say that 10 times, at up in Connecticut, and a big light bulb went off. I've never had another experience like that. It was like, oh my God, I really like this medium. What's to like about woodcuts? You know, I think Barbara will confer. It's the oldest form of printmaking, dating back to very ancient China. It's wonderfully graphic, and each generation can reinvent it to express what they want. And so this particular imagery that I recently printed with Susan is a bit of a departure for me. Most of my woodcuts are nature-based, so if you look at my website, you'd see a lot of trees, you'd see seascapes, you'd see clouds, and you know, all sort of, I think I do a lot of trying to pare things down to an essential essence, you know, that tipping point between representation and abstraction. So what happened here was hard to say where the actual sort of lines and stripes, how they came together, but I grew up on a beautiful farm in rural Ohio, and the house I grew up in was up on a ridge, so we actually had the feeling of looking down onto orchards, and you know, there were very classic farm fields all around us. So this is my idea of the 4 seasons. fall, winter, spring, summer, and I carved several blocks so that I could push and pull the colors and have a lot of fun just playing with colors and textures. So I was thinking about the prompt, what does the world is going to hell and I'm printing yellow. And I was thinking, that is really a great anthem for any artist, because artists have to wake up every morning and, to a certain degree, reinvent themselves. And our job in life, because it's how we're wired, is we are allowed to be obsessive compulsive, and we're allowed to go really deep. And let me go back to the woodcuts, because I did bring an example. I know there are plenty of printmakers here, but just for those who don't know, woodcuts are a relief print. In other words, the ink goes on top, rolled on top, and then pressed onto paper when it goes through a big press, a roller on a press. So anyway, that could be passed around. That gives an idea of a very abstract sort of nature-based patterning I was interested in. One of the prompts was I was influenced by my artistic family. My mother was a great artist. I had an older sister who could draw animals like they were. Here we are at Susan's studio. I remember, sometimes people's words really resonate with you. And I went to visit, about 10 years ago, I went to visit a woman called Jean Woodham in Connecticut. She's not a household name, but she was a very big deal, I think in the 50s, 60s, maybe early 70s. A petite 5-foot woman. She made metal sculpture, heroic, huge metal sculpture that's on the grounds of many of our top corporations in the country. And she was well into her 80s when I just paid her a sort of homage to Jean Woodham visit. And one of her phrases that I will never forget, she goes, she was encouraging the passion and to follow your heart and be true to yourself and all that sort of stuff. And then she kind of got a twinkle in her eye. She goes, I would encourage you to work as big as you can to get noticed. This from a little 5-foot woman who was doing multi-story heroic metal sculpture. And I listened to her. I really did. Within around that time, I had just taken that workshop, the woodcut workshop, and I immediately grew my print to 6 feet. So what you see here, this the 3-foot by 3-foot module is what I typically do. So I have lots of 3-foot wood blocks. And I often do little smaller 1-foot kind of preview prints to make sure I'm going to be happy with committing. And it is a huge commitment to embark on a new print. But it's a pleasure to be surrounded by such wonderful artists and to hear where inspiration and ideas come from. And it's just a treat to be here. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Judit Varga. I'm the ceramic
artist here, or I'm not a printmaker per se, but actually I'm using the same techniques as any printmaker. So thank you, Eve, for the demonstration for your piece, because actually you just imagined the same thing out of clay. That's what I'm using. So all of my work is the decoration is done in the flat form. It's not made out of wood, but a sheet of clay, a slab clay, and I layer up the colors on that. And then when it's a perfect time, when it's a good way, then I build up my three-dimensional form. So you could see my work as a three-dimensional print, rather than framed into a 2D piece. I'm Hungarian. I do have an accent, and I live in DC and in the United States in the last 20 years. And I know Susan as when I was a mom. That's when we connected, and our kids are friends, so we have to be friends too. No, it's serious that Susan, we met when I was in a different stage in my life, and the whole story about me as an artist, probably about the different stages in my life and the changes between those. And anybody else, you know, you live through a couple of years, you're young, then you marry, you have family, and then you do your work. Besides all of this, I changed countries. I start to speak another language. I live in a different culture. So all of these changed me in different ways, and I find eventually that my work reflects that. I make cocoons and I make seeds. The cocoons are mostly reflects on my or left behind pieces of the change when I went through, and it's a very important pieces or very important reminders, all of those life-changing experiences. Like I was a mom for 8 years, full-time mom. I gave up art completely because I didn't have the space, the energy, and nothing else to make really meaningful art, but on the level what I wanted. So I was a full-time mom, and I enjoyed that, and I loved that. But then I translated, I metamorphed into a new life in my artist life. And I do seeds, a lot of seeds, elements of my pieces, because I think about new beginnings, and that's my female part probably too, that represents something, a possibility for a new beginning, and I really embrace that. So that's about the visual of my work. You can start to wave. And I'm open for questions, but I'm very happy of this being among the girls and the women, you know, and I really like that part of this community, or helping each other in different ways. I think it's very important. And
so what you're saying is that's clay?
Yes. So.
I'm so fascinated by it because that's so unusual.
I'm different, I'm so sure.
No, that's good.
It's I work in a little bit different way than usual. When, you know, sometimes, because clay is very, you know, throughout the histories you have some kind of expectation how clay should look like, and then that's sometimes people are surprised this is clay. But it's a high-powered stoneware, it's a semi-porcelain body, and I just find
it's very unusual, and it's very, very pretty. It's just
glad to hear.
It's just amazing what you did to it.
Great, thank you.
Could you talk about your thematic development?
Yes.
The themes in your work.
Yeah. I have 5 pieces here. I usually work in groups, but the way I work is I try to be as open and fluid about the pieces as possible. So I have a very vague idea what I'm going to do, but when I'm making the big piece of slabs, flat clays, all with the patterns and the surfaces,
then sometimes the idea changed because they gave me some kind of new way to go. But basically all of my pieces ended up to being some kind of closed vessels, what I call cocoons. There is an inside and an outside for them. The inside is as important, and the outside, the inside is usually full with patterns too, because I feel that maybe again the way I live my life and with all of this accented life, I feel that the first impression is not always the full picture of anything. So I try to draw the attention as much into my pieces that people are willing to do the second look, and willing to have an understanding about something, what they see. And I think that's the most important part about my work, what I try to achieve. And the other thing, I like the lines, this bandage or this lace kind of things, again, you know, being wounded or vulnerable or whatever, and finding a new life kind of thing. Good. Thank you.
So I'm going to try to get through these questions. We're going to have a panel discussion, and then we're going to open the floor for Q&A. So in the curatorial statement, I define iron painting yellow as a metaphor for notions of self-preservation and empowerment. But some of you have touched on it, but I'd like to go back to that and ask that you please describe what the term means to you.
I didn't touch on it, but I will. What it means to me is that in all of my career or my making art, I have wanted to make it the way I wanted to make it. When I went to graduate school, my teacher said, my mentor really said, if you want to make the art the way you want to make it, you had better get yourself a job teaching someplace at a college where you have time, otherwise you're going to starve to death because you're not following what's happening in the world. And so I was fortunate in getting that job at Montgomery College early on, right after graduate school. And to what it means is, in fact, I like it much better than what we started with, because it expresses exactly how I feel about what I'm doing. It's the empowerment to make what I want to make, whether it's in fashion or it's not in fashion, whether it's what everybody else is doing or it's not doing. And there we are.
Well, you made me think, Barbara, that maybe I said it, maybe someone else said, you know, you just pretty much have to make art. And I think this self-preservation, the idea, or empowerment, I recently, a lot of changes in my life this last year, so I recently had an astrological reading. And this woman told me, in it we were discussing about, you know, the fact that I'm kind of, not really the black sheep, but I'm really the one that's different in the family. And I told her, I said, you know, what's astounding to me is, you know, when I was making very figurative work, they all could relate to that, you know, the body, the landscape. When I started to do all of these symbols, you know, gee, you could be painting kitchen floors and making money, and you could be doing this. She told me, she said, you know, she said, and I think a lot of artists are like this, she said, you know, you're the messenger. You know, you're probably sent there, you're opening your family's eyes. The thing is I've given everybody in my family a piece of my art, and they love it. They hang it in their houses. They don't say, oh, put it in the closet when she's coming over. They love it. But yet they don't know what to do with it. And so I think self-preservation and empowerment sometimes can have also to do with like you going ahead and doing what you need to do, because I'm not saying we're all geniuses, I'm just saying that you do these things that just don't quite fit in. And she gave me a very interesting perspective by telling me that, you know, you're probably opening eyes and you're allowing people to try to understand this where they would never have gone out on their own and either made this stuff or so. Just my comment.
Well, I think I touched on it before. You know, I think it's an interesting phrase that Susan came up with, by the way. The world is going to hell and I'm printing yellow. As sort of an anthem that speaks to me about the passion necessary and commitment necessary to be an artist, and also the striving for your own personal authenticity and having hopefully artwork that's recognizable and to the public, that you're interested, the public hopefully can learn to be interested in. And we are messengers, I think. We are sort of filtering massive amounts of information and constantly distilling. That's what artists do. We are constantly distilling a huge amount of information and ideas down to some sort of essence that can speak to us. And my nature-based work isn't politically charged or anything, that I'm constantly thinking about environmentalism. I'm thinking about our biological origins, unanswerable, huge topics, and how do you grasp that tiger by the tail? So we can talk forever about this sort of thing, but it is a very good question.
First of all, thank you, Alex. I forgot to thank you. So, thank you. I just want to say that there's something about, the particularity of how I grew up in that was a very big story that I lived under. And so the empowerment that comes with making my work is a piece of being able to speak a story. A lot of the story is not my story, but it is I am able to speak it by making the visual or when I was writing. And there is something very satisfying about, again, documenting. For me, it's really the clarity that starts to come with making the work, and it is empowering because it's clarifying. And also, when there is, a personal starting point, there is something that then transcends and reaches out to other people who've had either similar experiences specifically or in other ways. And when they look at something and they respond and it is, it resonates for them, it's extremely powerful and it's extremely satisfying. And the last thing, just in terms of these small pieces that I've been making, it does relate to the work before the poems, because I want the viewer to go in and be close to it. And so there's also an intimacy that I'm trying to make a connection, whether it's a connection to prior stories or connection to people and their stories. But it is empowering to make something, and then I see it and I get some understanding, and then the next amazing thing is if someone else looks at it and has a response as well that resonates for them. So.
Well, I was going to say that the show originally became, the idea for it was, I was at a conference in New Orleans, and I was a printmaking conference, and I was sitting with three women who are not here today. Anita, Jung, who's at Iowa, professor at Iowa, Kathryn, Maxwell at Arizona State, and Sujata, Gopalan, who lives in Terre Haute. And we were sitting there, and there were these fantastic women I was at this table with. And that's where the at the table initially came from. We were in the Ruby Cafe, the Ruby Slippers from The Wizard of Oz. It's a New Orleans breakfast place. And I said, they go, we all liked each other, we liked our work, and I thought, well, that's a great idea, why not have a show? And then it sort of transpired into where I am in my life with women that I've worked with, and Helen Frederick was one of my mentors, yet to work. But all of us, beyond the idea of the visual imagery, we have a ritual, and I think it relates to the concept of being a woman. And at first, I was a little hesitant to say at the table because it had a feminist association, and Judit goes, "What's wrong with the feminist?" But I think the idea of my perspective is how we all work together. So when Eve comes to work with me, and we work very hard, but there'll always be a call from a daughter who's in Los Angeles or in New York, and she's being a mother on the phone, she's printing. And the same with Patricia. she'll be talking color. She does color. Her other job is she interior designs for Strohsnyder. She puts up, well, you have your own business, you know, she has another thing, but there's always a million things on the table. And when I work with Miriam, and being a master printer, working with artists, I think printmaking is the best thing in the world, because you have a sense of community. You learn a lot about a person when you're working with them. It informs the process. And we have an hour of coffee before we even begin to get to the press, because we have so much to discuss. And you could just hear from today everybody standing, talking about their, I mean, I didn't really know about Judith's work and the concept of the cocoon and her history, knowing her since our kids were very little. So, and so the emphasis for the exhibit is that there's a lot of activity in the art world, and you see things, and there's a lot of fabulous work going on right in your own backyard. But the idea that, you know, as women and as artists, we work really hard. And I've learned from leaving teaching and being on my own more that I've never worked harder. And I think that all the opportunities that all these women really make the opportunities for themselves. And we've joined in partnership with Myrtis. That's what I love about this gallery is, you know, you're not an artist that brings your work and then hangs it up and just disappears. I mean, we've never been treated to a tea like this. But it's a partnership to make an art life. You don't make it by yourself, but yet you ultimately are responsible for yourself. You're ultimately responsible. So I think the idea of the printing yellow, the idea of, you know, you get to a point where you have to just do the things you want to do because time is short, and but the reasons that people are doing things are very unique, and I think that, you know, because a lot of times we were talking all the way down here, how do you sell work, how do you do things? It's very hard. But my motto is, besides printing yellow, is every night I go to say, keep going. And I just want to thank you for the idea of what is this all about. I mean, I think it's feminist on one point, but it is what you said when we all sat down together. Should I say that?
Sure.
Yeah, we all share one of these.
Oh, right.
Sorry. But
I
know, but I mean, it wasn't like we look at ourselves, I mean, because we all have daughters too, and they're actually, my daughter's much more of a feminist, overtly, than I ever was, in a different way, you know, but I don't know.
Well, I don't think that I have actually thanked both of you, and I want to. And I will say again what others said. I feel really special to have been honored by this beautiful lunch and beautiful table and unique as you look around. So it's very nice.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to pose a couple of questions now. I think in some ways you may have answered this, so if you feel that you've answered it fully, we'll go on to the next one. But just in the event that someone wants to comment. So why is making art important to you? That's all we know how to do.
It's celebrating life. I think Susan may have said that, somebody said that, if I'm not making art, I don't feel good. And I have gone through a period in my life in the last couple of years where I've had a difficult familial situation where it was very difficult for me to make the art. And when I began to work again, it's like there was a huge cloud lifted, because it's part of who I am. So I think that that's what it's about.
I can say something. I think for me, art, but I did not realize at the beginning when I felt I have to do this, you know, when I went to the academy and everything and back in Underwood. But it turned out that it meant to be. I mean, if I wouldn't do this, what I'm doing now, I think I couldn't be totally myself in a different culture, different language, and different country. With art, I can express myself without using a word, a language with words. I can express myself in another way, and I always say, I don't speak English, but I do speak clay.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, it's a life-saving.
Just quickly, I mentioned I was working in architecture for a number of years and drawing endless straight lines and conceiving. I was down the totem pole. I wasn't designing the buildings. I was part of a cog in the wheel. But it was satisfying just in that I was working on a team towards a finished end. That architects rarely see their big projects come to fruition. Often you're just helping design for a competition that doesn't get picked. So at the end of the day, having the great privilege to be an artist and have something you've made with your hands is so thrilling and so much fun. And yes, it's a tremendous amount of work. The stakes are high. It's often a very costly endeavor. And by the time you frame the work, and it's a huge commitment. But it's something that sustains me, and I think all of us that at the end of the day, makes us happy. And we hope that energy and that commitment speaks to the audience as well.
By the way, is this on?
Oh, I don't know. Did I get something?
By the way, is it on? No?
Hello?
By the way, your English is so much better than my Hungarian.
Actually, your English is so much better than my English.
All right then.
So I think that, thank you for those responses, and I think that the message is really an important one, or the question is an important one to pose, and the answers have been profound. I don't think that people really understand how serious artists take their art making, and that it really is an extension of who they are, of their existence. It's the core of their being. And, we look at it, some people have looked at a work of art and said, oh, I can do that. But no, you can't. It's like, photography has become somewhat of a stepchild with the advent of the digital, technology. But, there's a composition there. There's balance with light and all these other wonderful things, components that go into the composition of a photograph that I think are often not appreciated now that, of the age that we live in, and quick appreciation or not of whatever's being put out there. And because, although I'm not a visual artist, I write. So when I write about art, I make a study of what I believe the artist has undertaken in terms of perhaps the narrative or just the work and the skill that went into creating the piece. So I wanted to pose that question, and thank you again for your responses, because, I really don't know that people really understand why your art making is important, which you beautifully responded to today, but the amount of work that goes into it, and so thank you for sharing that. So the next question, in what way is your work an expression of who you are?
You just said that. I don't know. When you make stuff, you don't really think about this kind of thing, I guess. But in a way, it's good to have in a situation like this, because it makes you think about important stuff and put them, in real words. I'm usually very quiet, maybe overthinking stuff inside. So I think I hope this piece speaks on behalf of me, so I don't have to. Thank you very much. But it's, I think, different. For me, I find a voice without really speaking. And some people write poems with words. You know, some people dance or sing or whatever. I choose to express myself without words, and for me, clay is just an amazing, vulnerable material which left me to feel fully or free or whatever. Yeah. So.
I think one of the things that I think about making my work is that I do intellectualize. I have a story that is ongoing. It is about the landscape. It is about mythology. It is about memory. And I start the work, but then if I'm working well, other things happen that I didn't ever anticipate. And I'm reminded of a piece, actually it's the one Susan helped me to print in 1995, because that's that big book her telling us, smiling, because she knows which one it is. And there's a tree in it, and on the tree there are two houses. And people kept saying to me, why are there two houses? And I didn't know. But I was in the middle of a divorce. And I didn't really think about the fact that I had made two houses in that, because that's what was happening to me when I was doing that. And that was two houses. And the work now, same thing happens. If the specific imagery doesn't feel right, I'm not expressing what I need to, and I know that I need to rethink and find some other way to go about how I'm feeling. During those years, my work was a lot about water. I make big work too. These are prints, but I make very large paintings. So, in fact, I understand that very well, because when I went to graduate school, the same thing happened. If you wanted to be noticed, you had to make big work, and here I was a small woman. And so I do big as well as small. So I can make a painting that would, I guess, take up the whole wall too. And in the doing of some of those, I was painting water. Now I love to paint water, I still do. But the painting of the water that I was making in those years was roiling water. And I didn't realize it. I just would find all the places in the streams that I walked by where the water was swirling or coming over, and that's what I was putting into my paintings. And I have a friend who is a poet who wrote a poem about one of them and talked about the roiling water, and I said, roiling water? I didn't know I was making roiling water. And it was during that period of my life where that was what was happening. So I think that for all of us probably, we have those elements that are intellectualized that we think about, and those things that begin to go into the work that really afterwards you might say, oh, well, yeah, two houses, makes sense, even though I didn't plant two houses there. So there we are.
Right. Well, I think this is a good time to open the floor up for questions, and then if no one has, we'll go back to the questions I have here. So does anyone have any questions?
Yes.
You know, when I look at artwork and things, I would think of music. I just wanted to interview or play some kind of instruments.
When I was younger, I played piano and guitar. I mean, I listen to a lot of music in the studio, and there are certain artists that I work better to, and your moods will, and have to be careful with if there's words when you're working in the studio, and if there's no words, it affects my mood. So, it depends.
I once did a paper for Southern Graphics Council about music in the studio, because I have the same thing. If I want to get back into my work, I play the World Symphony. Just have to begin it. I don't even have to hear the whole thing. And I can begin to work. And so I think about what I'm going to have, same. But the thing that was interesting to me is that there were a huge number of people at that conference. And afterwards, people I didn't know kept coming up to me and saying, oh yeah, I do that too. Oh yeah, I do that too. And so I think it's something that even if you don't play, that music is such a part of our culture and our lives for so many people that it's an influence, and it certainly is for me.
You know, I mentioned earlier that way back, you know, I mean, I never told my parents this when I was in grad school, so I thought they would want to commit me, you know, because I have notebooks still in my studio of little calligraphic shapes based on the music I was listening to. I play piano, and I've got a set of conga drums. I don't play them too often, but I think that, I mean, it's rare to meet a human being that doesn't like at some point in their life, at some time, to hear music. You know, I once did a body of work entitled Lullabies. It was dedicated to what people sing to their children around the world, and I think, you know, that was, in that way back, I was thinking of pretty much every culture sings to their children, and I think it's pretty, you know, innate in people. I don't know what kind of a human being you'd turn out to be if you hadn't had some kind of music at some point in your life, whether somebody's singing to you or, but yeah, I don't know if anybody else plays, but I don't have enough time to play piano anymore, but I can make time, right?
I play the jazz station, local jazz station. Sometimes I open up with Oklahoma. Oh, wow, that's beautiful. I got to be going.
Does anyone else have any questions? I've often thought about hosting an exhibition, or curating one, art inspired by, and then a certain genre of music, because my father was a professional jazz musician. So we grew up with this wonderful musical household. And my mom played the cello, but my father was a professional musician. But we had all these instruments in our home: pianos, cello, stand-up bass, and small little percussion instruments. And unfortunately, I didn't take to any of those, but I was surrounded by great music. So I'll ask another question then, and I'm fascinated by this concept of groups, artist groups, which it seems like the path of most artists these days is an individual one, but historically, you know, art movements were born out of artist groups, artists working together. So, you know, out of which there were, okay, let me ask the question. Historically, artists have worked in groups, out of which many art movements were formed. Would you consider a future collaboration with a thematic approach is one question. And the second is, has any consideration been given to forming a group? Susan?
Well, I have a question maybe that would go back to the audience. How is it today speaking to more than one artist? I mean, as an audience, how did you feel about seeing more than one person up here talking all about themselves? I'm just curious.
It was great. What I felt was there was a structure that was connecting all of you, and it was partly intellectually driven, but also I felt that there's a physicality in what you do in printmaking that has challenged you in ways that we don't find ourselves challenged. And part of that is your ability as a wonderful artist, master printer, understanding how to physically draw things out through color and layers and the press and all your years of experience. So for me, having you all together has just been very illuminating, honest, authentic, and has, I think, given some of the devices that we don't always understand about why we make, not prints, but art. And too often we section ourselves into one area, and you didn't do that today, so this is what made it so rich.
Well, I find listening to all of you, without realizing it, you've created a community. Just in the way you speak, what inspires you, and the synergies you've all created. And I think it's been extremely interesting to see how it all weaves together without even being pre-planned. So thank you.
Well, I'm the one thinking about the 19th century and thinking about all those men sitting around in cafes. But although there was a great synergy to a lot of what they did, an enormous amount of it has to do with marketing. And although the ideas coming out of Impressionism, particularly, we see this bubbling up with these ideas about new concepts of light, then in the 1880s it really breaks off and everybody begins doing their own individual style of work, and they really go off in a wide range of different directions. So it's like a flow, that if you look at history, you see it changing from groups to individuals and back and forth again. And I think that in the 21st century, we're much more likely to see people working individually and creating really interesting individual work and creating new avenues that really don't necessarily link to everybody else because the world has gotten so diverse.
I'll ask another question, and this will be the last. I'm trying to think of which. Well, I'll ask this one because it relates more to the group. As women artists, what do you believe to be the strength of your work, individually and collectively?
Well, I was thinking earlier as I was getting all effusive about the groupness of our experience, but I feel like, you know, in relationship to art history, I really am aware of formal qualities. Like when I put a work together, I don't have an agenda that relates to a total personal psychological reason. It's very visual, it's very, you know, I think I understand Ellsworth Kelly, and I didn't understand him before until I made a big rectangle of red. So I feel, as an artist, I've just really hit a place that I'm very excited about, beside the process, but the visual information, I get it. I get what some of these people were doing in art history, abstract expressionist, conceptual art, well, not conceptual, but the minimal kind of thing. That's where I think I am right now. And maybe that relates to the idea of the theme, the world's going to hell, and I'm printing yellow, because there's so much going on. I just want a pure line would be just perfect. And it's a pure visual design element, like an architect, you know. So for me, I mean, I think we didn't really talk about what are the themes in the work per se, you know, because that's a whole other conversation art historically, besides all of our personal autobiographical material, but the power of the work to stand on its own 2 feet if you didn't know who we were. And I think for me, as an artist, I'm now at this point in my life, I actually feel like I graduated to a place that I'm ready to take some of that on. I've never felt like that before. And it does directly relate to printmaking and the process. And so I didn't really answer it in terms of a woman, but in terms of art and like what's the future. We have digital artists. A lot of the people in the show have used digital materials to come up with imagery, like Kathryn, Maxwell, and Bridget Lambert doing the icon that we see across NCIS and House of Cards, the texting and information. But for me, I think my goal as an artist is to keep pursuing the formal elements and see where they take me.
I actually never think of myself as a woman artist. It's interesting, but I just don't. I think of myself as an artist. So I've known that I've had difficulties associated with being a woman in the years of my career. Early on, I remember talking to a gallery viewer, showing work. This was very early work, and it had to do with interiors. And he looked at it and snidely said, "Oh, that's domestic." And I was really devastated. And 2 months later, I looked at a show in his gallery, and it was a man showing still lifes on tables. And I thought to myself, that bastard. To put me down that way when he knew he was going to show that work that looked like that. So I've had that experience. Other than that, I just tried to go on.
Yeah, I think I also kind of don't think of myself so much in the genre of female artist, just that I make work. I recently read an interview with this Israeli novelist, David Grossman, who's on a circuit now because he just has a new book. He used a term, the inevitability. He loves the inevitability of a book, of a novel, and that when he writes, he knows it's going to happen. And I think, I think the strength personally for me is that I trust something is going to happen, because I don't work in a linear way. I don't have an agenda necessarily. I might start with a color. I might start on the scale of scale large or small, but that I trust that something is going to happen, and somewhere, sometime, it's going to be clear, which is what I referred to earlier. To me, what this work is about. I mean, I know what it's about, but it becomes even more clarifying. So that's to me kind of a very strong anchor, and whether that resonates out there, I don't know, but for me that's sort of a driving piece.
I just want to comment briefly on the first part of the question about being a woman. I think of myself mostly as an artist. I'm pretty aware that I'm a woman. When I think back, I've had a lot of shows, and group shows and solo shows, and many of them, group shows, have always been mixed with men. So it's unusual to show in a group of women. I would say, it's fair to say, looking back, that a large portion of the shows I've been in have not been all women. So it's special. And I think there's a lot to say about male artists and female artists, but this is special. It's kind of nice,
I agree.
Well, I would just like to end with a quote that I read, and unfortunately I can't attribute it to the person who wrote it, but it said that young artists seek perfection, mature artists seek truth. And so I think that what I see in your work is truth. And I want to thank you for sharing your truth with us. I think all of the work here is beautiful, strong, and again, I thank you for the privilege of allowing us to host you here. So if there aren't any more questions, we'll close now. Thank you all for coming, and continue to enjoy the food, the music, and the art. Thank you.